Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the BPCA webinar on wasps and bees today. I'm just going to initially do a few technical checks. I've got a colleague standing just by the side just to make sure the sound is okay. I believe all of you guys will let me know as well. As usual, just a quick reminder that I can't see you guys. Obviously, you can see me and hear me, but I can't see you or hear you. If you've got any issues in terms of technical connection or anything like that, then you need to put it in the chat section. It's going to be difficult for me to keep an eye on that, but the sounds of it at the moment, I'm loud and clear, good. So that's fabulous. Any questions that you have during the presentation, just please make sure you put it in the Q&A section, because that's where I'm going to be looking when we get to that question section. If you see on your screen, it's just down the bottom, Q&A. You can click on that, type your question. It's optional whether you put your name in there, you want to be anonymous, no problem at all. You know, all I'm interested in is getting those questions answered for you. And in terms of CPD points, we've got 1 today. So if you're BPCA registered, there's 1 point, and if you're basis prompt, there's 1 point also available. When you registered for the webinar, you should have put those details in. So it will, if you have, it'll automatically upload. Anybody who's watching this later on down the line, so if you're not watching it live and it's pre-recorded, then once you've watched it, then you need to either contact the basis to get those prompt points, or you can do it through the unstructured learning BPCA registered side of things. But we can help you with that. If you've got any issue, just give us a call and we'll help you with registering it later down the line. Great. So yeah, how many? We've got what exactly? Yeah, 201 participants with us today. I think so. We did initially send this webinar out as wasps and bees and hornets. You can probably see now that the title is wasps and bees only, and that's because I've got an hour and they can be quite big subjects. So although I've taken hornets out of it, I'm going to do a quick kind of FYI on hornets, just so that you know you've got some information going forward, or you can go and seek out afterwards. But I just haven't got quite enough time to cover it. But we have done them previously on regional forums. Forum 1, I think it was, we covered Asian hornets, so you can always go back on that and have a good look at it. So it's a big subject, wasps and bees. And also, always we'll start off with a bit of biology and behaviour, but it's really a whistle-stop tour. You know, the most important bit is to get that practical implementation, and you know what you can do, what you can't do, what we recommend you do. But again, Q&A section is always really helpful to get those questions in there that you're thinking of, because I bet a lot of other people on there are thinking the same things, and then we can get them answered and we have a chat about it. So good stuff. We've got 2 questions that have already popped up, but what I'll do, so we'll get on with the presentation, and then after the biology and behaviour, I'll pause for a bit and we'll do some questions then. So anybody posting questions now, I will get to them. But we will do those as and when we get to the questions section. So I'm going to share my screen now. I believe you should all be able to see that screen there. One of my colleagues will let me know if the picture isn't right, which I believe we are good to go. So yeah, wasps and bees, biology and behaviour. Let's start off with this section. Now, in terms of you know the detail that we're going to go into, you know, it's really important for 2 reasons why we've got this biology and behaviour knowledge. And that's because of course you need to know what the pests are doing, how they're living, why they're living that way, what their behavior is, because then you can actually implement your control techniques with those things in mind. That's really important, top of the list. However, also important, I believe, is when you're with your customers and they're asking you questions and they're talking about the pest problems they've got and you're trying to assist them. Of course, it's important that they can see that you know what you're talking about and you've got some knowledge of these animals or insects. So yeah, so 2 really good important things there. So the bits we will cover, as I said, it'll be a whistle-stop tour, but the really important bits I think will be good for you to take away. And also on that, there's a possibility after today you may walk away and think, I didn't necessarily learn anything new. But you know what? That is a really good thing, because that says that you're up to date. You know, you obviously do lots of training and CPD, and it's a confirmation to give you confidence that I'm up to date and I know what I need to be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And if you do walk away with some new information, fabulous. You know, that's what we want. Okay, good. Okay, so as I said, we'll cover wasps and bees. But just as a quick FYI, like I mentioned, and I promised, hornets. There is an app that you can download called the Asian Hornet Watch. Now, this provides you with some ID samples, and you can identify any species you might come across. We get some photographs sent through to us sometimes from members, non-members, and the media as well, asking us to say whether something's an Asian hornet or not. So I'm pretty sure you guys will get the same as well. So yeah, the Asian Hornet Watch app is a really good thing to download. As I said, if you do find anything, you can just have a check on there, because sometimes the colour variations in their abdomen, it can be different depending on the time of the season and their cycle that they're in, or the growth that they're at. But yeah, usually with the Asian hornet, as you can see there, they've got a lot darker abdomen, and their face is a lot more orange in colour, and some people say they certainly look a lot more aggressive. But yeah, and also with the Asian hornet, they are smaller, slightly smaller in size compared to the European hornet. So those big yellow ones we see flying around, that's the European one. And as most things, they're beneficial. So if we don't need to deal with them, then great. But certainly, if you think you've got an Asian hornet, get on that app, identify it, and also there's you can record it and report it as well, and it can be dealt with through DEFRA and their agreed relationships they have with experienced pest controllers that deal with Asian hornets. So yeah, so we're not going to be covering any more than that. So if you do have any questions, you can email them to me, or we can find the answers. But generally, find it, report it. Okay. Just a quick reminder with wasps, bees, and I've put hornets in there as well, so it's the same thing, is that they are all pollinators. Although we know bees as the most prolific pollinator, wasps do the same as well, just through their activity of feeding on nectar. That physical presence on the flower can actually transfer that pollen and fertilise the flowers as we need. I think we all, some plants such as grass seeds or dandelions, they usually fertilise themselves by the spores floating through the atmosphere. We can see that sometimes, on a summer's day when it's quite windy, you can see them floating around. That's how they pollinate each other. However, some flowers rely on bees and other insects to do that for them by that transfer. So really important we remember that they are beneficial insects, and when we're speaking to our customers at any point that we can decide actually we're going to leave this alone if that's what you come to. Again, talking about the fact they're pollinators is a really good positive step towards educating your customers. So remember they're pollinators. And also, you said that they're social insects. Now, the last webinar we done was on ants, and they're in the same category of a social species. And basically what that means is that they group integration, the division of labour, and they also can overlap generations. But as we all know, we've got the queen, we've got the workers, we've got the males, normally referred to as drones, and they all have their own responsibilities. The queen, of course, laying eggs. The workers doing the foraging for food, and also the defence of the nest as well. Generally, only one egg-laying queen within these species of social insects. There's a few ant species that do have multiple queens, as we know, but focusing on honeybees and wasps, there is only really one egg-laying queen. And of course, the females forage food, and the males more social insects, and they're more for fertilisation of the queens as well. Solitary bees are not social insects as such. We'll go into a bit of solitary bee just coming up, but as the name suggests, solitary bees are not social in the same sense as honeybees, wasps, and hornets. So yeah, there's a few images here now. When it comes to species of bees, of course, a honeybee, that's quite distinctive, and we can usually identify that quite easily. But we can sometimes, get confused between a red mason bee and even sometimes the tawny mining bee as well. When we see these maybe on our windowsills or outside, it can be, a task to identify it. Certainly, if a customer's sending you a photo of it and trying to judge it through there, but I find the most reliable is the eyes. As you can see on here with the red mason bee, you know, their eyes are quite prominent. You know, you can see them there quite well. Whereas a honeybee, they're normally not quite as prominent on top of their head. So, but also their abdomen's slightly different shape. The colours can vary as well. And of course, bumblebees, you know, very easily identified. Lots and lots of different species, many species. But you know, generally as a species, they're pretty easy to identify. So hopefully we're all confident with that. As I said, you know, we're always happy to receive photographs, you know, emails and such, and try and help identification if that's what you need to do. So going more specifically then into honeybees, you know, there's about 5 or 6 different species, but in the UK we just have the one species. Each nest, so we've got some really good images coming up. In the second part of this webinar, we're going to talk about the actual handling or control or management of bees. I don't like to use the word treatment, and we'll come across that, but some good images. But you can see on this slide there in that top right how they construct their hive, you know, whether it's in a cavity or it's out in the open. In this country, we don't see colonies like that building their wax cells on open branches. That's normally due to our weather, really, conditions. They prefer to be you know, protected and covered up a little bit more. But that's how they look. And you know, they can get to 30 to 50,000 individuals at peak. And normally when you start getting to those higher numbers, you know, the 40, 50,000 number, that's when we can maybe start seeing swarms appearing. So honeybees will normally swarm for a couple of reasons, mainly because either the hive is becoming too large and unmanageable, or possibly the queen is becoming sick or possibly dying as well. So she will take a percentage of the hive with her, the workers with her, to, you know, seek out a new place to nest, and then the new queens will take over. And just a bit of, you know, interesting information with when the queen starts to lay those new female queen eggs, because she'll lay eggs which are female workers, and she'll lay eggs that are male and drones. And then she'll also lay another batch of female, but they're queens. And obviously these ones will mate with the drones and become fertilized. Now, when they start to hatch out, they'll actually start to have a competition to, you know, fight each other and take over the hive. So you'll only have one remaining queen usually that will take over that hive and continue the work with it. So yeah, quite interesting how they work. A queen actually can live up to 7 years as well, but most commonly in the wild it's 3 years. But in perfect condition, she can live for 7 years. And the workers are usually a lot shorter lifespan, 6 to 7 weeks. However, as we know, honeybee hives can overwinter, unlike wasps. They can be in situ for many years. I do remember having working on some army bases many years ago, and there's certain places they had, you know, long established honeybee colonies and hives in their chimneys, and they've been there as long as they can remember, but possibly decades. So you can imagine the amount of wax honey and bees that are in there. There were a lot. But if they do overwinter, then of course the workers will live longer, possibly a year and a half. But generally, if they're walking through the life cycle and they're an early brood, then it'll be 6 to 7 weeks that the workers will live. And of course, they'll be replaced constantly by that constant egg laying that the queen will do. And as you know, with the swarming, we can get calls for that sometimes. I believe some of you have probably, you know, already had calls for bees. I know I've spoken to members in the last week about bee calls that they've had. Whether you've had swarms yet or not, possibly. Be interesting to know if you had, but of course that's something that unless you experience with them, obviously getting a beekeeper to deal with them. So a little bit of an interesting fact that a colleague of mine put on there is that if bees were paid the minimum wage, each jar of honey would cost £142,000. It's a bit more expensive than the Manuka honey we buy, maybe £9 or £10. So yeah, they're really hard working insects, and because of the amount of honey that honeybees produce, allows us to farm them. Of course, others I'm back now. Can everybody hear me? I'm back now. There's issues. That wasn't my technology. Oh, there we go. I think you can hear me now. Apologies about that, everybody. I don't know what's happened there. It just completely disappeared from my screen. So, as I said at the beginning, in terms of technical problems, this is what can happen. Right, I'm going to share my screen again and try and be a bit more successful with this. Okay. Apologies, everybody. I appreciate patience. Okay. I don't get stressed out of these things, isn't it? Okay, share screen with all again. Don't anybody leave. I promise we will get there. Here we go. It's strange because I haven't got any else here using the internet, just me at the moment. So I will get information that are up and running again, I believe. Recent saying that there any problems. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it was really bad. Do bear with me. Is that a little bit better? I'm going to go into. Okay, I'm going to continue. I'm keep an eye on my phone. If you can look away to see whether or not the audio has improved. Again, I can move the mic a little bit closer to me. Okay. Well, we left off with regards to honeybees and okay, I'm going to unplug the audio. And now I'm hoping that my microphone has taken over rather than my laptop. I've got a big microphone here. I'd like you all to be involved in the pain that I'm experiencing right now. I think that hopefully should be correct. Okay, yes, I'm going to carry on. So I'll keep an eye just to see whether or not that sounds a bit better. But I believe it's quite bad. I really do apologise about this, guys. You can just bear with me. I'm going to switch my microphone. Okay, right. I think you all might have seen I disappeared for a moment and now I'm back. So oh, sounds good. Okay, back and all good by the sounds of it. Let's see how long that lasts. My screen looks slightly different, but we will see how we go. Okay. Oh, turn off, turn on, you see, makes everything work. Oh, it certainly tested me today, isn't it? Okay, I am going to share my screen. I am going to ask for my colleague again to tell me whether you guys have got the right screen. You've got the honeybee screen with the bee flapping away without the presenter view. Do you want to see what I'm looking at? So yes, really apologise for that. I can see quite a lot of you have remained. I think just a couple of people have left. I don't blame you, but thank you so much for remaining with me. Yep, we've got the right screen. Okay, I'm not going to touch too much other than my mouse every now and then. Right. So yes, honeybees. If they've got any more questions about those, we can do that. But I've wasted a little bit of time with technical issues. Really apologise about that. So yeah, I mean, just as a bit of interest about the wax. So we don't, no one ever really talks about the honeybee wax as much as, the honey, of course, and the larvae. But the wax is actually formed into scales, as we see when we look at the nest, by 8 wax-producing glands in the abdominal sections of worker bees, which they discard it in or at the hive. The hive workers then collect and use it to form cells of honey and storage for the larval and pupal protection, and also with the honey, and that's all within the beehive. I mean, beeswax, we all know, has been used since prehistory, actually as the first plastic, interestingly. We use it as a lubricant, as a waterproofing agent, wax casting of metals and glass, polish, and all sorts, and cosmetic side of things as well. It's being used a lot. So yeah, honeybees, they're amazing at everything, pollinating, but because of the uses that we can gain from them, the honey and the wax, they're just so they're just so important to us, and we need to make sure that we're aware of their importance and protect them. Good, so we're still good to go. Let's get on to some solitary bees. Now, I've had a few calls about this as well. Some of these images here, certainly that mound in the soil there, and also on the right hand side we've got a probably a red mason bee, can't quite see from that photo, but sort of sticking its head out of the mortar in between bricks. And we all come across that. I don't think as much now, but sometimes there can be, you can get these solitary bees who, they are solitary, but however, you can sometimes, if you get an area that's particularly useful to them and a good breeding ground, it seems like they're nesting together or they're creating a social environment, but actually they just come together to build their individual cells. In the top right hand corner of the page, you can see there sort of a very rough diagram of you've got a mound of soil at the top there. The bee will actually burrow down into that soil, and they actually can come off in a few chambers, but right down here, right at the bottom, you've got the egg on pollen clump. I mean, so solitary bees in Britain are highly diverse. So therefore also the nesting habits. The majority of British bees nest in the ground, excavating their own nest, as I said, that diagram describes. And the female builds a nest by herself. She chooses a suitable piece of ground. I normally find it's normally a sandy ground, as you can see from that image in the bottom left. It's pretty sandy, isn't it? It makes it easier for them to be able to excavate it. And once she's, uses her body to dig out this nesting chamber in the ground. She then adds pollen to the chamber, which is often moistened with nectar, and this is where she will lay her egg. She then seals it off, that section of the nest, before moving on to the next chamber. So, there can be multiple eggs in each of these chambers. And although most solitary bees nest solitary, like I mentioned before, in suitable nest sites, you can often find an aggregation of them. There are also a number of species in Britain that nest in the ground but create tunnels over their nests, turrets, sorry, over their nests, and that's just a difference. As I said, there's 250 species in Britain, 270 species that we're dealing with, so there's a variety of nesting behaviours. But generally, if you see the activity within ground, where they're hovering over the ground and creating turrets like that, and they're a solitary bee. Very, very important to define that. And as with the red mason bee, which is common for nesting in cavities between brickwork, they'll normally take advantage of that mortar in between the bricks that is maybe a bit brittle or a bit old and become sandy. And again, they pretty much the same process as the tawny mining bee, or those that will nest in the ground, just they'll do it in the mortar. Well, they take advantage of what they can, as every animal will. These nest cells contain pollen mixed with nectar, as I said, and this is what happens when the egg hatches. That will quickly eat the pollen before it spoils, and then continue to grow in the nest cells as a larvae. The larvae will go through a metamorphosis and eventually pupate, similar to like caterpillars do. They then stay dormant in their cells as pupae until they emerge next season as adults. They do stay down there until the following season. really important part to remember. The exact details of this larval history can depend on the species, but the principles generally remain the same across the board. Said solitary will nest in these different types of areas, single eggs, and the way to deal with them really is to address that weakness in the soil or the mortar, which we'll go on to a bit later on. Also, it just went wrong way there. Okay, so yeah, we may have some more questions about that. That'll be coming up soon, very soon, in the next couple of minutes. I think we're halfway through. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, I believe it's still okay for you guys. I haven't had any issues messaged through to me yet. Fabulous. Bumblebees then. So, bumblebees, they're very similar to the wasp life cycle, which we will come to in a moment, except they collect pollen and nectar rather than insects as wasps do. And they actually have like a pollen basket that they carry it on. It's quite a fascinating sight, really. If you're watching your plants in the garden, you see the bumblebees flying around, you can quite often see a sort of an orangey yellow ball sort of almost seems like floating behind them, or them carrying it on the back of their legs. But yeah, they've got a pollen basket there on how they carry it. So great to watch. Many different colors, many different features. The bumblebee conservation.org is a great organization and website just to have a bit of research if you want to go a bit further into bumblebees. But just interestingly, there's a bumblebee called the cuckoo bumblebee, and they don't actually raise their own young. They're actually a form of parasite of other species of bumblebees, and what they do is they will actually lay their eggs within the nest of other bumblebees, and those unnoticing bumblebees where they've laid their eggs, they will look after them for them. They will certainly become their almost surrogate parents, usually unknowingly. It's quite distinctive. And usually in the top right hand corner there's a image of a bumblebee's nest that's quite common to find within the ground, and it's quite distinctive. Usually tightly packed hexagonal cells for raising the offspring and storing honey, of which they do. But as I mentioned before, they just create enough for themselves. That's all they do. They don't overwinter generally in terms of the whole nest, so they don't need to create extra stores for them to be able to survive on like honeybees do over winter. And because of this, that's why they're not farmed by us. They don't create enough honey, and obviously we wouldn't take what they've got. Whereas honeybees, they create that extra honey that again certainly benefits us. And also with these nests that you find in the ground, this is, you can see they seem quite messy and disorganized. You might also find a number of dead bees and grubs near the nest entrance if you were to dig or remove or relocate any of these. And this is because worker bees will remove dead and dying bees from the nest to keep it clean and free of disease. It's a process they have. They're quite interesting. They're other things. I think we all could agree that beneficial insects, wonderful to see in the garden, and good to know just a bit about them. Okay, so on to wasps then, before we got some questions coming up in a moment. With wasps, you guys know you deal with them all the time. Every year you get your call outs, a fair bit about them. But just as a quick update on what they do. Of course, we have the queen that will overwinter. So when the weather starts to decline, last maybe October, November time, she'll go into a type of hibernation and overwintering. And she would have been fertilized as well. She'll have that ability to lay viable eggs once the weather improves in the springtime, of which she will obviously wake up, start foraging for a suitable nesting site. And once she's done that, she will usually create a nest about the size of a golf ball and will lay about 10 to 20 eggs. And this is where she will take care of them herself. She'll be foraging for them, catching insects. They usually catch them in flight and chop their wings off with their strong mandibles and take it back and feed the larvae. And once these 10 to 20 eggs have hatched out into the female worker wasps, they will then take over, and the queen will obviously relax a bit, and continue to lay eggs throughout the season. Nest can normally get to about 5,000 strong. That's normally what we see later on, of course, in the season, August, September, possibly. And sometimes I think, the nest that could get to this 5,000 number, we might be looking at a football size or slightly bigger than a football size, but I've certainly seen nests a lot bigger than that. And that might be because that queen has decided to set up nests next to an old one. So it may seem like it's a larger nest in terms of structure, but actually it could be one it's just attached to another, and it looks like a giant's nest compared to other ones. But as I said, it could just be that fact she's next to an old one. And then again, they'll go through that cycle. They'll climax normally towards the end of summer into early autumn, and then the process will start again, where the fertilized queens that have hatched out and mated with the drones will overwinter, and then the process starts again. So yeah, with in terms of wasps being beneficial, like I mentioned at the beginning, they can pollinate flowers by their physical presence on plants and flower heads, just by collecting things like nectar. They like to feed on these sweet things, and they will transfer it. But also, as aphid control in our garden, if you've got a keen gardener, actually having a wasp nest that's far enough away that it's not causing them any problems in terms of stings and things, can actually be beneficial for them, be a good pest controller themselves, if you like. So yeah, they can be beneficial. Right, okay, so again, whistle stop tour, those last few bits, apologies, going a bit quicker than maybe I normally would, but because of the technical issues, I want to be able to get your questions in. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, which could be hopefully cause any problems. And we have 9 questions. So there's 30 messages in the chat. Just want to make sure anybody that's put questions in the chat section switch over to the Q&A, because that's what I'm going to be looking at. Okay, so yes, do solitary bees sting? Great, great question. I would have probably covered this if I hadn't been rushing so much. So solitary bees, pretty much all of them, if not most of them, have the ability to sting. They do have stings, but they're quite superficial, and they don't, normally they can't sting humans, or they don't have that ability to penetrate our skin. I remember a beekeeper I used to work with or give a call and I needed his help. The way he would test out whether it was a solitary bee or not was to, put it on his hand and try and get it to sting him. And if it didn't, it was a solitary bee. And if it did, then it wasn't. But yes, that was quite brave of him. So yeah, no, they have the ability in theory, but they can't penetrate our skin. Okay, so can you clarify which ones sting? So there we go. Sorry, just done that. That was the next question. As I said, wasps sting, bees will sting, whereas solitary bees, they can in theory, but they don't because they struggle. Okay, so Ari cuckoo bee, what species do they use? Is it just bees or any pollinator? Whichever bees, I don't think there is a particular bumblebee species that they prefer. They will pretty much take advantage of any nest that they can. They don't have a preference. Now, if there is anybody on today that is more of an expert in cuckoo bumblebees than I am and knows differently, then please do stick it on the Q&A and I'll read it out. And yeah, as I said, sharing of information would be great. But no, they won't be picky. They will use whichever nest they can that benefits them. Pretty lazy, really, isn't it? So yeah, okay. What are the bumblebee hives made up of? Similar to with the wasps. So again, some of this information, I'm glad you're asking these questions because of the technical problems were brushed over a bit. So similar to with wasps, they will collect things like chewed bark and timber. They'll use their saliva, mash it up, and then start building those cells. So it's a very similar process to that. Obviously with honeybees, it's a lot different. They use those waxy wax cells that they produce that wax themselves and then create that structure. But yeah, the same as the wasps. Okay, next one. Hi, is it possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint? We can sort that afterwards. But this presentation I mentioned at the beginning is that you can re-watch it. So once we're done and we're recorded it, we'll upload it onto the BPCA website, and you can watch old webinars. Is what we tag it as. So if you do want to go through it again, you can do that. In terms of the PowerPoint presentation, it's not something that we have or is available at the moment. If you wanted to ask that question more, directly to our Marcoms, then pop an email in and we can ask that question. But no, it's not something we make available generally. Let's have a look. Can we get someone asking about the stings again? I think we answered that, just clarifying which ones do stings. I said solitary bees. No. Just clarify, can we relocate the bumblebee's nest? I will come on to this in a moment. We'll cover the management and treatment, if you like, of all of these species. But just to answer that really quickly now, yes, you can. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Have there ever been more than 5,000? I've seen really big nests. Could there be 2 queens? So no, there won't ever be 2 queens in one nest. They're they will fight, and they will fight to the death, usually with queens. So and she wouldn't produce them anyway until the end of the season. Once it comes to a time for them to pack in their bags and moving on, the queen will lay queen eggs, or female queen eggs, and then once they've hatched out, those queens will then obviously leave the nest, fertilize, and then go and overwinter, but they will not reside in one nest together. I don't know whether or not there's been any nests over 5,000. You know, I've never seen anything or any more technical information coming in saying that you know, they could be larger, but you know, why not? I mean, maybe 5,010 we might see. But yeah, 5,000 is the technical guidance in terms of, you know, what nests can get up to. I mean, a lot of the time they might not even get to 5,000, you know, 2,000-3,000 possibly, if they're left alone. When queen wasps mate, do they choose males from a different nest so as to strengthen the gene line? No, I mean, they don't, absolutely not. So they can, it's not, you know, the drones will leave and they'll carry on with their business. But yeah, if those, once those queens have also left, you know, they'll make whichever male they come across. And also those drones, those male wasp bees, they will mate as many times as possible with as many different females as possible. As with most things in the animal kingdom, it strengthens their chance of, you know, having their gene line continue. But no, they can do, but it's not specific to that nest. Is there any way of deterring wasps? We can have a little look at that in a moment. Treatment, yeah, absolutely. In terms of things like, I say, wasp pots, you can usually try and keep wasps away from a certain area. I will mention that in a moment. I'll leave that question or that part of it for the treatment and management of wasps. I believe that wasps become aggressive at the end of the season due to alcohol content and rotting fruit. What do you think? And that was from Mike Unbugged. Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's when wasps will certainly become more aggressive, because, and it's not the time, it's the males as well. So, you know, once they've done their thing, don't really need to do too much more. Also the female workers, when they start to, you know, move away from the nest and just come to the end of their life cycle, they love these sweet things, you know. That's why people's picnics can be ruined, feeding on, you know, jams and sweet things, looking for rotting fruit. And as we know, the alcohol content in that can make them pretty aggressive. It makes them kind of a bit drunk and a bit dozy and therefore aggressive, and possibly landing in places where we might then also sit or walk. And of course, we can then get stung by, you know, simply sitting or walking on them. But yeah, it's normally towards the end of the season, during, you know, the active busy season, when they're off, you know, feeding their larvae, you know, this sort of time until August. They can still be aggressive, you know, if you disturb them or get too close to them. But generally, if you leave them alone over there, they continue with their flight path back and forth, and they won't bother with us too much. You know, so they want that insect. But they can also feed on things like carrion. So you might find wasps around bins, because so the public health side of things in terms of wasps, you've got the sting, but you know, they could transfer diseases or transmit diseases through their physical presence, as we can see them flying over, you know, if your bins are open, or there's a bin bag that's been split open, or, you know, possibly landfill sites or waste sites where there's food waste, or possibly even carrion, you know, dead animals. You might see them, you know, crawling and feeding around these areas. So yeah, they can transmit. It's not just their stings that we need to be concerned about. Okay, so we'll get on a little bit now. There is a possibility we'll go over the hour slot, but I don't think the webinar or Zoom is going to kick me off. So as long as it doesn't, we might go over a bit. So as long as you guys are okay with that, just to allow for that technical issue we had in the middle there. So yeah, there's just another comment, one more. Drones of wasp bees don't sting. Yep, absolutely. Can confirm that. So great, some great questions. We've got 20 more questions there, which what we're going to do with the Q&A is I'm going to do some more at the end. Get through as many as I feel that we can and you guys are interested in. But anything I don't get to, we're going to be doing a regional forum online next week, and any questions I don't get to here, I'm actually going to do a half-an-hour slot on there, just specifically answering questions to bees and wasps, because it's that time of the year, isn't it? I think it's really useful for everybody to keep talking about it, keep asking the questions, and as I said, anything that I don't get to on here, I will hopefully get to it next week. Okay, great. I'm going to be sharing my screen again, so let's all keep our fingers crossed. Okay, good. Again, I will keep my phone up. My colleague can just let me know if there's anything wrong with that picture, but I believe it should be okay. Right. So wasps and bees, management and control. Now these are the bits that you guys are going out there now. You're getting the calls, you're getting the questions from your customers. We might feel that we've got a handle on wasps and what we're doing, or when we're not doing them, or when we are doing them. But certainly bees can be a real confusion point in terms of what we're allowed to do. So I'm going to cover honeybees first. Now I think with wasps, we kind of know what we're doing, don't we? We know the application we're using, possibly the chemicals we're using if we are, decision making, and I will come to that at the end. But I think the questions I'm getting at the moment are almost completely around honeybee calls or bee calls, and members ring in saying, look, I've had a call, customers reported bees, they've been there for whether it's 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years, what can we do, what should we do? So I think it's really important for you to have that decision tree and follow the bee treatment hierarchy. And the first thing is absolutely don't do anything, leave them be, pun completely intended. We have a leaflet available in our print shop for you to download. We have a group called BeeWise, which is a special interest group, and we do a bit of work every now and then with just what does the industry need, is there any documents we can create that will help you guys when you're out and about, and this is one of them that BeeWise came up with. And that's, we're leaving you be, and it's a leaflet you can give to your customers to say, I've come and had a look, they're honeybees, they're bumblebees, whatever they might be. We're not going to treat them, and you can explain that to them. But before you go, you can leave them with this leaflet, and it just, gives them a little bit more information about it. And also, sometimes when you're talking to your customers and you tell them why you're not doing something, you leave, and then they kind of still, maybe they didn't take it all in, or maybe they don't understand properly. So leaving them with some technical reading or some further reading can be really helpful and great for yourselves as well, because you can put your logos on there and they can have your contact details handy. So yeah, great thing to download. So don't do anything. That's really your first step. If they can be left alone, leave them alone. Now these next two things, can they be encouraged or taken out, or can you redirect them? Now that is very specialist work, including the live bee removal and homing, of course. But in terms of encouraging or taking them out, if there's a new swarm that has just entered a certain cavity or a certain area, there's a possibility they may leave in a couple of days. So you could say to your customer, look, they may leave. So if they've just turned up, give it a couple of days and they could move on. And then if they haven't, after a couple of days and they get back in touch with you, you can speak to your beekeepers. So there might be some options. Again, you do need to contact someone who's experienced with with bees, and you can use certain smokes, or not chemicals, but smoke can obviously make them quite docile and sleepy, so it makes it safer to move them about, and it could actually discourage them from creating a nest in that cavity. So really good idea to look into that. And then you've got the live removal and rehoming. So if you've got a nest that's established, if you've got the honey cells and the brood cells that have been there, and then they're eager and they're definitely going to be staying in that cavity, then of course in terms of non-lethal control, it's live removal and rehoming. and depending where they are, you've got the the knowledge you need on building, or removing bricks, removing tiles, doing that in a safe way, as well as a way to protect the building, and obviously make sure you're not damaging the building in any way. And then also, once you get to that hive, removing it. And so having the skills and the ability to be able to do that, it's really messy work. I'm going to go into a few more images on that a member of ours kindly sent. But it says there, those three bits: the encouraging out, redirecting them, or removal or rehoming. That might be an opportunity to diverse your your skills, your company skills, your offering, rather than we're going to treat them lethally if any time it comes about. If you do some extra training, get some look into some training courses on removal of honeybees, and just see if you can sort of diversify the offerings you have. I know that the expense of customers going for the option of removal it can be a lot higher than using a chemical to treat them, but we really need to kind of move towards the approach and the opinion of, we're not going to do that. This is what we offer: live removal and rehoming. It's either that or nothing. If I always like the analogy, if a tile was to fall off somebody's roof and smash a conservatory pane, or a few glass panes in their conservatory, they'd have to spend quite a few thousand fixing that. And we should see bees within cavities that need to be removed should be considered in the same way. It's your building, they've got a responsibility to not kill these bees, and yes, it's going to cost them some money, but it's an upkeep. It's one of these things that happens. It's unforeseeable, but unfortunately they need to invest in saving the bees and rehoming them, and in a non-chemical way. Really important to talk about that a bit more. I really could talk about this subject for a lot longer, but of course on webinars we're always a bit restricted on time. And then the absolute last, as I said, mentioned there, is lethal chemical control, with a sad face there. But it is absolutely, and I think everybody I speak to, they say that is absolutely their last resort. You just got to think to yourself, is it? Do we really walk away where we can? We all know bees are great pollinators. So the next slide, to add some more context to this don't treat advice, we've got honey cells and we've got brood cells. So of course, makes sense, don't need to explain what they are. And these were some images, or kindly sent to us by one of our members, Begon. Now, I was really eager to get hold of these, because this shows you how, in cavities, in the top left here, you can see that the front, there's been many bricks that have been removed. You've got the different cavities going off there, and you can see the brood cells and the honey cells hanging down in different sections. The brood cells are normally a bit darker in colour, but it depends on whether it's how healthy the nest is as well. So that's another consideration with this. If you've got a healthy hive, it can vary in terms of the bees in there, or how large it is. But if we just go with a standard healthy hive, that top left one there, if you just imagine that wall was put back together and you couldn't see that hive, okay, and all you could see was maybe 2 or 3 holes under a soffit where bees were going in, and a customer said, right, I want you to come and I need to get rid of these bees, and you decided to treat them with I don't know what you would treat them with. We might talk about that. You guys will probably ask about what we're allowed to treat them with, but I don't know if there is anything, to be honest. But let's just some people can come up with the flying insect side of things, and if lethal control is needed, they might consider it. But if you've got 2 or 3 holes where bees are going in and out of there, and all you can see are those entry holes, you can't see all of these bricks removed, you can just see entry holes. Now, if you were to put your nozzle of whatever product you're using into a couple of those holes where those bees were going, do you really think it's going to control that nest? Do you think it's going to lethally access the whole of that nest? And the most probable outcome of it is that a small section of it you'll put insecticide on, the insecticide will seep through, you might get some insects carrying a bit in, but actually the queen could be right down the bottom of where those hives are sitting. So the queen is the important one to obviously destroy. So how can you ensure yourself and your customer that, you know, those couple of holes you're injecting insecticide into is actually going to reach the whole of that hive and that nest and actually control it? You can't. You don't, you know, unless you can remove those bricks and see where the hive is. You know, they can weave in and out of all the different cavities. You know, it's really complex. So, you know, putting an insecticide in a couple of entry holes is probably just not going to do the job, especially if it's been there a while. And also looking at, you know, all of these pictures here, these images, you know, those bees have got larvae cells and honey cells. Now, if you were successful and you killed that whole hive and, you know, no more activity, all bees dead, what happens to those cells? What happens to those wax cells with the honey in and the larvae in? The larvae will start to stink, start to smell. They're, you know, living things at the end of the day. They're going to have an odour. When they're not fed and they die, they're going to smell a lot. You could get flies due to that. With the wax there, you could get wax moths, you get different types of moths, maybe, you know, even not store product insects, fabric damaging moths. And that honey can, you know, we find honey in Egyptian tombs, you know, it's been there for thousands of years. You know, that honey is not going anywhere apart from possibly seeping down the walls and causing a problem. So, you know, there's many things to consider when, you know, if someone says, oh, I've had this nest here for a few years, it wasn't a problem, but it is now, I need rid of it. Really, treatment, you know, not only obviously we don't want to treat them with chemicals, but even if we decided to, is it really, you know, is it really going to actually achieve anything? And I think, you know, it's something to really think about. And, you know, if you want to continue offering a service to your customers for, you know, for bees, then, you know, diversifying your skills and getting that experience, or even contract, you know, subcontractors. You know, there's experienced companies out there, Begon one of them, that you can, you know, get in contact with. But yeah, think of all that honey, all that larvae, all those wax cells that if you do kill the whole thing, it will still be there. You know, but also with the removal, it's a messy job. You can see on the right hand side there, they've pulled out I believe that looks like a larval, oh, it might be honey actually, it might be a honey cells, can't quite see from this, but you imagine dealing with that. You know, you've got gloves and PPE on, but that honey is going to go everywhere, you know. So if you do get into live bee removal, there's lots of other considerations, you know, not just the actual technical, can you take the bricks off and get that hive out and, you know, be safe with it, but, you know, the handling of these things is quite messy. So you've got to have the proper disposal routes, etc. So yeah, you know, it is a lot, but, you know, going back to how I started this slide, if you were to put insecticide into those couple of entry holes that you can see, how are you to know that it's actually going to do the job? And yeah, and sealing up, of course, you know, you've got to seal up these holes. Okay, listen, I'm gonna, you know, I've gone on about that enough. I think you guys have got the gist of how we see things. I know it's not always as straightforward as just saying yes or no when you're out there. You've got your decisions to make, but, you know, to hopefully give you some support in any thoughts that you might have on it. Bumblebees, you know what, I'm going to cover these really quickly, just say no. But someone asked a question earlier about removal. So yeah, you can if you really need to. I mean, to be honest with you, if a bumblebee's nest was, you know, in a compost that was, you know, near to where you know, a gardener was accessing, you know, even then you could think, so, well, are they too close by? You know, could they still be left alone? Because they're, you know, they're pretty docile. They don't cause us any problems. They're not aggressive. You know, of course, if they sting, they can only sting once, so they don't really want to unless they really need to. So, you know, if you can generally, you know, even just stay a few feet away from them, they're going to be fine. But if you really need to, yes, you can. I think I've done one in my life, in my 18 years or whatever, one bee nest that was next to a walkway going into a school, and of course, you know, lots of children and possibly some of them, you know, high risk in terms of allergic reactions. So we did relocate it, but you've got to be careful because of the structure I showed at the beginning of those hexagonal cells that are quite messy and disorganized. You know, they don't gel together as well as, or they aren't as uniformed as honeybees. So, you know, you need to may possibly know the time of the year, how many adults that might be in there, so that might give you an idea of nest size, and then you dig carefully and you dig down. It can be quite far down, it could be close to the surface. They might have taken over an old burrow of some description, you know, an animal, just to make it easy for them to create that nest. So yeah, you can, you know, you've got to be careful with it. You put them in boxes and you can relocate them. Pretty easy to do. I think most of the time, you know, 500, you're looking at 500 bumblebees as an average in a bumblebee's nest. You know, they don't get, you know, it's that 500, you know, 500 for bumblebees, 5,000 for wasps, 50,000 for honeybees. You know, it's quite a straightforward number to remember. So you don't get many in there. So yeah, I would say just say no. If you want to remove them, you can, but just relocate them. Okay, so wasps, I mentioned them again. You know, I asked myself really, you know, what do you as the pest professional want to need to know about wasp control? You know, it can be a large subject, we're limited with the time. If you're treating a nest, you know how to get it done, you know, whether it's access, you know, product choice, safety, advice to customers. This is all stuff you think about, you know, how, whether you're going to, you know, get in the attic or whether you're going to use an applicator to get to the entrance holes. You know all this stuff, so we don't need to talk about the ins and outs of what tools that you're going to use. So we talk a bit more about decisions and I say the absolute no-nos. But you know, the first thing to consider is, you know, should we only do these if they're a public health risk? Now, you know, they are beneficial insects. We do want to try and leave them alone, but generally, I suppose if your customers call you and they say they've got a wasp nest, it's because it's in an area that they feel is of a health and safety concern to them, and you can ask these questions over the phone, get an idea of where it is, and make that decision yourself. But you know, certainly, you know, wasps can possibly be a little bit more aggressive and territorial, and certainly if they're low down or in a flight path of where we're walking, you know, it could possibly cause a problem. So, you know, still a decision to be made, but you know, when you're speaking to your customers, you can discuss that. And also, you know, in terms of the insecticides, so you know, FICAM, I don't usually mention products, but I know it's going to be a question in terms of the popular dusts out there, bendiacarb, that have been used historically outside. Now, normally we say this is outside, you're standing outside, you're applying the dust into the cavity through entrant holes. Now, officially, this is absolutely fine still. You know, we've asked Bayer for specific guidance on it, and as long as that product is going inside a property, then it doesn't matter where you're standing necessarily. But if there's any risk of you applying that powder to an area where it may remain on the external face of a building, then you can't use it. It is internal use only. You cannot use it externally. So you can stand outside and apply it inside, but if you feel there's a risk of it being left out on the tiles, then you need to consider another product. Speak to your suppliers about what products they have. You know, I've you know, there's a lot of them. You know, your suppliers will have, you know, good knowledge on them. Some of them are the manufacturers as well. They can tell you the things that they're having reports back as being good or working well, and then you'll also figure that out yourself as well, what's good for you. But yeah, if you were inside an attic, for example, and you've got a nest right there in front of you, yeah, you know, these dusts that, you know, are internal use only now can be used. Of course they can. You just got to think about your safety, of course, if you're working in an attic. So yeah, you know, you've got to think about the formulation, the active ingredient you're using. And also, is the entrance to the nest actually where you think, like I mentioned with the bees before, you know, if you've got entrance holes going in a couple of places, you know, do you know that that nest is directly under there? So if you're pumping a chemical, especially if some people might be going for liquids, you've got to know that nest is there, because if it's not, and actually the wasps are flying in the hole and actually crawling along a cavity or a beam to the nest where it's a bit further, if you're not actually going to achieve much. So, you know, if you can get inside a property, might be an attic, just to see where the nest is, see if it is inside, and get an idea of where they're going. And it's always going to be, you know, a better option. But of course, as I mentioned, in terms of safety for all, if you're going into an attic with a wasp nest, you've got to think about, you know, protecting yourself, but, you know, not just thinking about, oh, I've got a veil on, I'm safe from the stings, but what about that, activity in an attic, it's a confined space. You've got beams everywhere, the lighting might not be great. So if you're in a place like that with a veil on and possibly a mask as well, are you safe enough? No risk of tripping or falling, or have you got an exit strategy so that if the wasps do become aggressive, usually some people keep the lights off and then put a torch a bit further away from where you are. So if the wasps do come out, they're going to be attracted to that area rather than yourself. So, all these things you've got to think about, in terms of safety for wasps, if you are going to go inside the property. But yeah, that's a decision, lots of decisions to be made each time you come across a wasp nest. So, the other thing to think about is also health and safety. So health and safety for the pest controller. In terms of stings, medical questionnaire. If you're an employer, do you at the beginning of each season get together and have a chat with your technicians and do some form of medical questionnaire, around stings? Maybe getting GP advice if anyone is particularly concerned about it. And also, you should, as a technician, be telling your employer, and your employer should be asking, has there been any change in sensitivity to stings? Have you noticed anything different? Are you concerned about stings? And then, of course, putting things in place to try and prevent them from being stung. We've all been stung on the odd occasion, and actually very few, for the 8-9 years so that I was out there doing wasp nests, probably only a handful of times was I stung, because a lot of it is judging the nest and, keeping your distance from it and kind of thinking, oh, these ones look a bit more aggressive than normal. So, getting maybe a three layers of clothing on rather than just one. But yeah, in terms of being proactive at the beginning of a season, ask everybody, tell your employers, is there any change in your sensitivity? Are you concerned about anything with regards to stings? And of course, things like ladders, don't work off of ladders to treat wasp nests, just don't. You've always got to have 3 points of contact anyway, legally, so how can you really treat something from a ladder? But also, just so dangerous. If those wasps come for you and startle you, most accidents and serious injuries and deaths are caused by falls from ladders. So just access into things only, or onto things, but no treatment from them. Health and safety of customers as well, give them advice about keeping their distance, consider barrier tape, manage their expectations. How long is it going to be until these wasps are dead? And if they're not, what about your follow-up offering of it? If they haven't gone within a few days, you're going to come back. Give them some details, manage their expectations. And just some general safety stuff. Obviously, always use the least toxic that you possibly can. Look at your product and the hazard warning symbols on there. If is there a pond nearby, or anything like this? And of course, those wasps, if you treat them, they're possibly going to exit that nest as well. So you've got to think about them and possibly falling. So if you've got any ponds or open water, get them covered up. We had a report recently of someone losing a substantial amount of expensive fish. It was a genuine accident, and I think it was actually a home treatment as well, not by a professional. And yeah, they contaminated their pond, unfortunately. Okay, so questions. I'm just gonna, we're over by 7 minutes, but you know what? Unless I have a phone call telling me off, I'm going to carry on for the next 15 minutes. And I think there's a few of the stayed on. But just before that, as I said, next week we are doing Regional Form 3. Any questions I don't get to here, I'm going to put them all on their individual slide, and I'm just going to read out questions and give some answers to anything we don't get to here, because not only for you guys that are on here now, there might be some people that are on the forum next week that aren't here today that also those questions can help out. So yeah, remember, get along. Lots of other subjects on there as well about bed bugs and some product selection. I think we've got Lodi on there talking about alternatives to some of the popular products that we might be losing soon. But again, they'll talk to you about that, sponsored by Killgem. Member huddles as well, we'll be all getting together, a similar thing like we're doing now, but it's more condensed, just a few of you, and we'll be able to see you. So that's the difference, is now I can't see you and I can't hear you. You can ask questions, of course, but on the member huddles, actually, you'll be able to, you'll be showing your face, you'll be talking, you can ask questions, and we can all connect and have a chat about it. A smaller event, there won't be as many on these webinars, just a handful, but yeah, some really good chance to have a look online. There's lots of different subjects. Bees is one of them. We've got birds and marketing and all sorts. So yeah, really good stuff to have a look at. And also we've got a pest identification course coming up on the 18th of June, just on Thursday, so if you're interested. Okay, questions. I am going to stop sharing and I am going to let's do 6 minutes of questions. So we'll see how I can get through them. I've got 28 on there. So I know I certainly won't get through all of them, but there's a possibility some of these questions have already been answered. So how can you deal with a very high bee's nest in a tree that needs to be chopped down? In terms of this, yeah, it's quite specialist. You know, you're going to have to get access equipment, and this is where obviously specialist companies who have that would need to be involved. Usually if you've got bees nests in a tree, they're quite once you're up there, they're easily removed. You've just got to think about the safety. You know, it might be using rope equipment possibly and normally, but yeah, certainly just cutting a tree down and hoping for the best wouldn't be the option. Of course, it's not safe for that tree fella that's there. But yeah, you know, removed. There's going to have to be access equipment involved, usually rope access. That's how we'll do that. How can you recognize a queen wasp? Is she larger? Yeah, absolutely. I would say she's about not half as big. I'd say noticeably larger. And normally you'll see her. What are we in now? June. So say April, May time. Depending on the weather, you know, we've all noticed it. You know, sometimes in March I've seen queen bees or wasps out and about, and I think, Christ, what's going on? But yeah, they're a lot larger and they'll be foraging, and then they pretty much disappear then until, you know, because obviously they build up their nest, they'll lay their first eggs, and then continue remaining in the nest, laying those eggs while the workers go out and do the work. And then towards the end of the season, when those wasps, you know, obviously she lays new queen eggs that go out to fertilize themselves, that's when you'll see them again, and possibly start seeing them trying to crawl into cracks and crevices around homes. And you might get reports of, you know, large numbers of really big wasps coming out at the beginning of the season, and that's because maybe someone's unlucky enough to have had a an amazing kind of overwintering spot for queens, and they've all decided to utilize it, and you know, you can get them coming out and it can be quite intimidating. But generally, that, you know, unless you sit on one, you know, they're not interested in stinging and attacking. They just want to get out into the open and go and find a nesting spot. So getting your windows open, getting your doors open, trying to shoo them out. But very difficult to do. There's not really any treatment because there's no nest at that point at the beginning of the season. Hopefully I'm not talking too quickly for all of you. If I am, well, I won't know because I won't look at the chat. I'll just try and naturally slow down a bit. Okay, so during heavy or prolonged rainfall, are ground nesting bees affected anyway? Cool. I mean, if you get flooding, yeah, absolutely. You know, but usually bees will select an area to have their nest that will be free from flooding and such things. You know, they'll test the soil out, they'll know what they need, and also if they take over a burrow or a harbourage of an animal that's moved on, be it rodents or rabbits, then generally, you know, they're kind of pretty confident that'll be a safe area because that animal has occupied it previously. But yeah, absolutely, if you get heavy rainfall and there's any flooding in the area, then yeah, it will affect them. Just general rain, no, and not protect themselves, and you know, the nest will be down through a hole and along a bit, you know, and the soil will obviously soak up a lot of the water anyway and won't cause them a problem. But if you get flooding where it, you know, flows through like a river, then yeah, of course that's gonna harm the bumblebees that are nested in the ground. Are tree bees non-native and more aggressive? So yeah, we have there's an organisation that's specific on tree bees. I don't know a lot about that specific species myself, because you know, generally leave them alone, you know, don't touch them. But in terms of them being non-native, theoretically, but they're still beneficial, you know, I don't think it's anything that we want to be concerned about, and we do still want to preserve. In terms of being more aggressive, I've seen quite a few of them, and I haven't observed them being more aggressive. If anybody has, or if there's anybody on here who knows a lot more about tree bees than I do, and they go, actually, Natalie, they're really aggressive, let me know. I'm more than happy to take those comments on. They say if a bee stings you, it will die, whereas a wasp can sting you a few times. Is that true or false? Yeah, absolutely. So with a bee sting, if when they've got barbs on their stings, so when a bee is very particular, and this is possibly another reason why they're not as aggressive as wasps, because if they sting, they're done for. So they're very picky on who they sting or what they sting. It's only if they really need to and they feel threatened, of course, they will sacrifice themselves. And those the sting has actually got barbs on it, so when they sting you, obviously hooks into your skin, and then when they pull away, it pulls their abdomen away. Sounds pretty disgusting, but of course they then die and you've got a nice sting left in your arm that you've got to pick out. Whereas wasps, no, straight in, straight out as many times as they want to, and that again possibly reason why they're more aggressive, because they can be. They don't have to worry about stinging and bringing their life to an end. So yes, absolutely. We've got time. I'm going to do a couple more questions, and then unfortunately, and what I'll do also is the last webinar that we done, I got a list of all the questions I didn't manage to answer, so I will do the same with this webinar. Any questions I don't get to, of course I'll be covering them next week as well, but for any of you that can't make it next week, I'll create a little document, I'll answer the questions in text, and we'll put it out on an email. You might need to give me a few days, a bit busy week, but yeah, I will definitely get that out to you. And you can also email or give me a call and we can have a chat about it. So do other pest control professionals find everyone now claims to have anaphylaxis when they are reporting a nest or wasp activity? I mean, again, I'm not out there treating them anymore myself, but I haven't had pest controllers coming to me saying that that's an issue. I mean, the problem with allergic reactions or anaphylaxis is that you don't really know whether you've got it. You can report if say you got stung once 5 years ago, you thought nothing of it, hurt a bit, but that was about it, and then the following year you get stung and you think, oh blimey, that was a bit more painful, and also that's swelling a bit more than I'm used to, then something's changing. So you need to be aware of that and either report it to your employer, or if you are the employer, take action, go and see your GP, ask what they can do. I mean, there's things like antihistamines, but I'm not going to advise to anyone to take them. It's down to you to decide that through your knowledge of yourself and speaking to your GP. They're medicine, so I can't recommend that, but you need to address it, certainly. As I said, with anaphylaxis, it can come on just like that. You may have been stung and been fine, you could be stung, and suddenly you have a severe reaction. Okay, so I am going to sorry, someone just asked me, bee drones don't sting. Not sure about wasp drones. Yeah, no, none of them do. It's a bit like male mosquitoes don't actually bite. I know we're not on mosquitoes, but a lot of the male species of insects don't necessarily carry out the same functions as the females. They're normally just there for reproduction reasons. Now that's not across the board for insects, but it's quite common, certainly in these social insects. Okay, I really am going to have to be done now. There are 23, not too bad, 23 questions remaining. As I said, I'll get a document together, get those answered, and yeah, get it out to you guys. So I really appreciate you hanging on there for the technical problems. Really sorry about that. And we're 17 minutes over, but hey, that was probably about how long the technical problem was. Really appreciate you guys. Have a really safe day, safe week, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe.